Back at it, Inside Zone on the 104.5 The Zone Podcast Network. So glad to have you with us, whether you're listening on the podcast, watching on YouTube, however you're consuming this. Really appreciate you taking some time. And I'm really excited to talk to our next guest who owns two distinct honors. One, he's the longest-running voice on the 104.5 The Zone airwaves. You hear him every Saturday morning, Forklift Systems Football Saturday with Coach Doug Mathews, and, of course, Big Orange Sunday on Sunday mornings. And he is the only running back in Vanderbilt football history to lead the SEC after a season. Coach Doug Mathews joins me next on Inside Zone. Coach, thanks so much for being here.
Well, Lucas, good to be here. This is a great idea. I'm glad you're doing it, and thanks for having me be part of it.
Do you think that that's a trivia question floating out there somewhere, maybe sports trivia at a bar or something? Who's the only Vanderbilt running back to lead the SEC in rushing? I'm sure you'd get some names like Zach Stacy, Ralph Webb. They've had some good backs there over the years. But no, the answer is Coach Doug Mathews in 1969.
Well, and it's kind of surprising that there hasn't been another one either before or since. There were some outstanding running backs before me, and certainly there have been many. You just mentioned Zach as one of those. But, it's about timing and also you got other teams you got to go up against, and there just haven't been one. Now and I think even now in particular with the passing game, that maybe a good running attack, maybe someone you would think would have that. Vandy would have that, but they haven't, and it's. I get asked about it occasionally. Frankly, it was so long ago that they'd have to read about it in a book somewhere for it to come up in a conversation.
Well, let's go back to that season real quick. 1969, Vanderbilt starts the year 0-3 with Alabama coming to town at 3-0. Final score of that game, Vanderbilt 14, Alabama 10. What do you remember about that upset?
Well, let's go back to the year before, my first year at Vandy. We had the only winning record in the whole decade of the 1960s, 5-4-1, tie against Florida. And then coming into that year, I moved over to the offensive side of the ball. We had a good team coming back. We had a lot of players coming back. Opened up with Michigan, and what happened to be Bo Schembechler's first ball game. And they were good, beat us. And then we lost a couple of games. Maybe, you always got games you think you should have won. Alabama coming in was just coming off one of the great performances, the Archie Manning performance. They played the week before Ole Miss.
Right.
Alabama won that game 33-30. Archie set some records that stood for, 30, 40 years maybe. But the thing came out of that game really was it wasn't, the score was not indicative of how well we played and how not as well Alabama plays. 14-10, but we had a punt return called back and really dominated the game. As Coach Bryant's wont to do back in those days was he actually came into our dressing room. And, that's one thing about him. He would go, and he was such a revered figure back in those days, still is. But anybody playing, you knew who Coach Bryant was, and it was a big deal to beat Alabama back in those days. So he came in and, basically said, hey, you all deserve to win the ball game. But it was pretty neat. It was short-lived. Georgia came to town next week and kicked their fannies pretty good, but that 1 week was good.
Vanderbilt outgained Alabama 473-201 in that game. I mean, that sounds like a pretty modern-day offense almost. That's a lot of yards in 1969. What kind of offense is Bill Pace running at Vanderbilt at the time?
We were running a split-back veer and then a little bit of I formation. More split-back veer at that time. Later in the season, we went to almost all I formation. Coach Pace came out of the Arkansas system that had the I tailbacks back in those days, the Johnny Majors and Doug Dickey and
right.
Barry Switzer, Jimmy Johnson. They were all coming through at that period of time. One thing on that, though, I may be a little bit wrong on the statistics on the other side of the ball. Vanderbilt, we intercepted 5 passes, and I believe Alabama only completed 4 passes. So intercepted more. So it was like I said, it was not a fluke. It was a well played and a game that we certainly deserved to win.
Doug Mathews, a 38-yard halfback pass in that game and a 6-yard touchdown pass to follow that up. What do you remember about the crowd in that game at Dudley Field at the time.
Well, it was a big crowd. There were a lot of Alabama people there. As we know, Middle Tennessee's always been an area that has a good number of Alabama fans. Tennessee certainly the big fan base here, but Alabama would probably be number 2 back at that time, and I think without question probably is now. And it was, we threw a lot of halfback passes. I was a quarterback in high school and junior college, and only played running back that 1 year. So we had we part of our game plan on the option, not game plan, but part of our offense on the option was I could throw off of that, and I don't know, probably threw 8 or 10 passes during the season. By the way, I think that's one thing that offenses don't do enough of now. They don't take advantage of running backs or wide receivers that can throw the ball, and I think that's a good. I think it's something that is really underused in college football.
Well, Derrick Henry certainly has that in his tool belt, and Titans have busted that out a couple of times in the last couple of years.
Well, you go back to some of the Super Bowls, they pull it out as special plays. I don't think it needs to be a special play, because the one position that you don't think about a lot, quarterback is a eligible receiver. Mm-hmm. There's not a defense in the country that is designed to cover the quarterback. And I think it needs to be used more, quite frankly, but that's probably a discussion for another day.
Let's backtrack a little bit. Growing up in small-town Oklahoma, 50s and 60s, you told me that you knew you wanted to be a football coach at the age of 7. What's Doug Mathews' first exposure to football?
I can remember, I don't remember way back, but my earliest memory of a football game, I was sitting in the stands watching my home high school, Pitcher, Oklahoma, playing a playoff game, freezing cold. Seemed to be freezing cold, at least. A lot of wind. Of course, there's a lot of wind out there. And I did from the earliest time. I knew I was going to play football. I had a pretty good idea I was going to coach football. Really thought I'd probably be a high school coach, because I really revered my high school coach. And that's one of the great things I think about high school sports, particularly back in that era. Your coaches were almost like your father, your parents, and well respected. And then I knew I was going to eventually be a coach at some point. Growing up in Oklahoma, Lucas, at that time was you were one of two things. Or maybe both. Baseball was big because I grew up 5 miles from where Mickey Mantle's from, Commerce, Oklahoma. He was going hot at that time. Yankees, Cardinals was the team that most people followed. And then football. Oklahoma football was right in the middle. Growing up in my early years in the mid-'50s was when Oklahoma had that 47-game win streak. And really, until they got beat in 1957, Notre Dame beat them, I just assumed Oklahoma won all the time, because from the time I was about 3 up to I was about 7, they did. I was crushed to find out that they actually could lose a game.
So before your playing days at Vanderbilt, you played junior college ball in Oklahoma, Northeastern Oklahoma A&M Junior College, where you're a Hall of Famer, won the JUCO national title, you're MVP that season, and you're recruited to play at Vanderbilt. Looking back at that recruitment process, if you have 247 Sports and Rivals and all these recruiting services you have now, what's a young Doug Mathews rated, do you think, in that time period?
Probably not real high. I weighed, coming out of high school, between 145 and 150 pounds. The heaviest I was at Vanderbilt was 165, and that was 4 years later. We did not take any film. There was no film. We had 19, 20 players on the team. We did play 11-man football. A lot of teams out in that area play 7-man football. And I grew up in Miami, Oklahoma, where Northeastern Oklahoma was, where I eventually went to school. At the same time, in the same class I was in, was a young man named Steve Owens, who we were very close. Steve won the Heisman Trophy at Oklahoma in 1969. But I had there wasn't any film to show. Nobody really came to our games that much, other than people around Pitcher. And it didn't have any options but to go to junior college, which was 15 miles from where I was. But how things happen. It happens, I think, to a lot of people. It was the best thing that ever happened to me because I got to play for an outstanding coach. We played for the national championship and won the national championship. And then I had opportunities after that to go on, and ended up coming to Vanderbilt on a full scholarship. So it's junior colleges are still big. I still try to support certainly my junior college, but others. They're more community colleges now. But again, without that, I would have had a way to go to school. My parents would have made sure I went to school somewhere, but it would have been much more difficult.
So you graduate from Vanderbilt in 81 after your playing days and transition into the coaching world as a GA. Of all your coaching stops through the 70s, because you go to a few different places before you ultimately land at Tennessee, whether it's Weber State, Louisville, I believe Virginia Tech, right? Of those stops, which of those was most critical to your development as a coach during your path to Knoxville?
Well, two areas. Immediately when I graduated from Vanderbilt, I coached 1 year at Montgomery Bell Academy.
That's right here in
Nashville. And then went
yeah.
to Northeast Louisiana after that. Got an opportunity. Coach Pace got me an opportunity down there as a secondary coach. I was 23 years old, had absolutely no business coaching anywhere in college at any position. Then I went out to Ogden, Utah, Weber State for a while, which, by the way, is where Coach Josh Heupel started his playing career. Beautiful place, learned to ski. We started our family out there then, but it was terrible football. There were four universities. Actually, Weber State was a college at that time. Only 89 schools in the state played high school football. You had BYU, Utah, and Utah State, and then Weber State. So you can imagine where we were in the pecking order of getting talent out of there. But Louisville, without question, went there, got an opportunity to go there as secondary coach for Vince Gibson. At that time, Louisville was an independent, still a city-owned university. It's now a state-owned university. Stayed there, and my first and after I was there 3 years, I really wanted to get on the offensive side of the ball and learn that. And the I formation, there was an opportunity with Bill Dooley at Virginia Tech. Coach Dooley was they're both of them. He's passed away now. He was Vince Dooley's brother. Coach in North Carolina had those great running games, running games. And North Carolina was then at that time. This was 1979. Was at that time the head coach at Virginia Tech. He gave me an opportunity to come there. I learned a tremendous amount about the I formation running game that really kind of fortified what I liked to do offensively. And then the next year had the opportunity to go work for John Majors, 1980 at Tennessee. Coach Pace, who was my head coach at Vanderbilt, was the offensive coordinator. I had worked with Frank Emanuel and Bobby Jackson, who were both on that staff at Louisville, so Coach Majors did not know who I was. But one of the reasons he told me he hired me at the time, which kind of always stuck with me, number one, he knew I'd work with some good people, Bill Dooley and Vince Gibson. But the other was he liked to hire people who had played in the Southeastern Conference. So if I had not played in the Southeastern Conference, I still might have got the job simply because of the people I knew there and they're recommending me. But that certainly had a lot to do with it. So, playing in this league, I think still, and even more so today, carries a lot of weight when you look, if you're going into the coaching profession.
What do you remember about the first conversation you ever had with Johnny Majors?
I don't remember a whole lot about it. When I came down, Blacksburg and Knoxville's probably 3 hours, maybe right. Not even that much. I think he pretty much made up his mind he's going to hire me because he knew my background. He had talked to Coach Gibson. He had talked to Coach Dooley. Three guys on the staff recommended me. He was. When I first met him, you sitting in the office there. I was a relatively still young guy, 32 years old. He was, and up till he passed away here a few months ago. He was an impressive guy, and he had a way of talking to you and verbalizing things. I'll put it this way: there was never any doubt in the 10 years I was at Tennessee who was in charge. Let me put it that way.
Sure.
But it was a great opportunity for me going to a school like Tennessee, going to a school working for a coach who had won a national championship 4 years before. We had played when I was at Louisville, and I was a secondary coach. We had played that 1976 Pitt team and they'd beat us up there. But it was a great opportunity, and of course, obviously, from that point on, changed the direction of my life would take.
So you're hired in 1980, right, as the running backs coach. You're also coaching specialists. Are you hired at the same time, the same cycle as Phillip Fulmer?
Yeah. We shared an office. He was the offensive line coach. He was hired in, I think, January from Vanderbilt, as a matter of fact, was assistant Vanderbilt. I came in February, and we were office mates up until we moved into the new facility. It's now the Anderson Training Center.
Right.
I think it was not Thompson Bowling, but it was anyway. It was that was in 1989, my last year there. We actually moved into there. But yeah, he and I were office mates. If you're in office as much as we were, you become pretty close, and that started another relationship that's been huge in my life. At that point, 1980.
Not only are you working next to each other, you're the running backs coach, he's the offensive line coach. Feels like a pretty important tandem.
Well, and the other part of it was the way that football was a little different back then, coaching staffs. Phillip and I were in charge of the running game. And we had Walt Harris at that. Well, Al Saunders actually was the coach real quickly. Bill Pace was only there 1 year. Al Saunders came in. Walt Harris came in. Kippy Brown came in. They were in charge of the passing game. Walt was the overall coordinator, called plays, but listened to a lot of people. But Phillip and I were in charge of the running game, and at that point, Tennessee was running a lot of split back veer, which is what Pitt was running with Dorsett, and a little bit of I formation. We pretty quickly went to running almost exclusively I formation and going to a 3-wide offense that was really the staple for Tennessee's offense for the next. Well, up midway through Phillip's career as a head coach for the next 15 years. So it was and we had some special players. We had some wide receivers that could run. Willie Galt being one of them, I got there about the right time. Coach Mathews had been there 3 years, and then 80 was the fourth year. The program was really down and had not been rebuilt anywhere near where it eventually got to. So I was able to be a part of the foundation from a recruiting perspective to, pretty quickly, about 1982, we became a really good offense, started becoming a really good offense. And then I know we're going to talk about it a little bit later when Ken Donahue arrived in 1985, we became an outstanding football program. And that covered about a 20-year span. You look about 95 and really a little bit before that, but 95 up until probably 2002. Tennessee, 85, excuse me,
right.
2002. From 85 to 1998, 15 years, 14 years, Tennessee won 5 Southeastern Conference championships. That's pretty strong now. we got a guy now down in Tuscaloosa that's kind of setting a different
new standard, right?
Different height, standard, right? But those were good years. We had really good football teams, very well coached. Played in some huge ball games and played in front of, what many would think the best fan base at a home game in the Southeastern Conference.
I do want to talk about the late 80s because that period fascinates me in the history of Tennessee football. But first I want to ask you, working alongside Phillip, growing close to him, working directly with him, did you think back then that this guy could be the next head coach of the Tennessee Volunteers, or even that this guy's going to make an excellent head coach in the college football level?
I did not. Here's what I knew about him. He was tremendously detailed, much more so than I was. But he was at 29. He got the job at 29. That's young for an offensive line coach. He inherited a team of players, a group of players that were all excellent young men, but not really what you were looking for on the football field. But he was always a tremendous recruiter, very detailed. He was a Tennessee guy, meant a lot to him to be there because he had played there. He grew up, of course, in Winchester. But no, even when they named him as the head football coach, I had gone at that point. But I had some questions, let me put it like that, but they were quickly erased because from day one he started he took the program. Coach Majors took the program without question, made it much better. When he took over in 1977, the program was terrible.
Right.
I mean, it didn't have any players. When I got there in 1980, it was an average at best. He took it to a level of winning SEC championships again, and then Phillip built on that and took it to a national level where I think any realistic observer would say that for probably a 6, 7, 8 year period, Tennessee was as good as anybody in America. And, nobody wanted to play him, and that's pretty heady at Tennessee.
Well, that's why it's such an interesting period to me, the 80s, because you're right, the 70s are a bad time for Tennessee football. Johnny Majors comes home as the prodigal son, right? Runner-up for the Heisman, a legendary playing career, just won a national championship at Pitt. And then here he is at his home program, who hasn't won a title since the late 60s. But it does take a few years, right, for Majors to really get that thing up and running at a championship level. I mean, it takes about 9 years, right, for him to win his first title as the head coach at Tennessee. So for you, as part of that coaching staff, did you guys feel any of that pressure, whether it be from fans, from media, when it's taking a few years to get those consistent winning seasons and contending for championships?
Well, first off, there was no social media.
Right.
The newspaper people, because of Coach Majors and who he was, they were pretty lenient with him. Certainly you're always going to have a writer or two who, wants to get a little dig in every now and then. But, no, there really wasn't any pressure because we all knew that they when they brought Coach Majors back, they were going to give him a big leash. The people who hired him, the Bill Johnsons and the Joe Johnsons, folks who hired him, they knew where the program was. And it took a while. Took him, he would say, took him a little bit longer than it should have, maybe. But again, starting about 1982, we knew we had the type of talent to be able to compete for a championship. It was 85 before we eventually won it, but and went to the Sugar Bowl, which back then, of course, that was your goal every year. Didn't have a national playoff. You wanted to make it to New Orleans on New Year's Day. But he had a long leash, because he had a lot of support, rightfully so, and it just took a little bit longer than Heath probably. I'm sure. I know because I've had too many discussions with him about it later. But he lost a lot of staff members. We didn't have a whole lot of continuity there. And I think that affected some of it. And then, quite frankly, Pat Dye at Auburn. There's pretty darn good coaches out there. Vince Dooley. There were some good coaches in this league. And but it was once we did get there in '85, it was a celebration.
Right.
People are still celebrating. Some of them, they were that age back at that time.
Well, Bear Bryant, obviously another one of those coaches, still going at Alabama. And in 1982, Tennessee beats Alabama, ending that 11-year drought. And there's that famous photo of Johnny Majors being carried off the field and shaking Bear's hand while he's on people's shoulders in 1982. Where are you when that photo is taken?
Well, I was on the sideline. I never did go to the press box. When I became coordinator, I tried it a couple of times. I wanted to be on the field where I could see, talk, get a hold of somebody and talk to him. That was It's really hard to describe what a big win that was because you're right. Tennessee had not beaten them in 11 years, 70 or 71. I guess probably 71. Anyway, I wasn't a Tennessee fan at that point, but it was huge because it was getting to be, hey, are we going to get back to where we can, get into position to beat Alabama? We'd played them well, but we hadn't won. And in that ball game, it was a magical. The World's Fair was there, right? You could hit a driver in a sand wedge. I'd probably have to hit a driver in a 3-wood now. But the World's Fair site was right there. There's a bunch of people there. It was a huge, huge crowd. And it was a great ball game. I mean, it was back and forth and back and forth. But without question, I never forget Coach Majors was talking one day in a staff meeting before the game, probably Monday or Tuesday. And, he just kind of mused this. He said, I think I'd lose the rest of the games this year if we could beat Alabama. That's how big it was. And what that game did was it propelled Tennessee from a recruiting perspective. It propelled Tennessee for those great years in 85 and 89 and 90 and then the early 90s up to the national championship game in 98. So it was a huge win, no doubt about that.
What's your fondest memory of the 1985 SugarVols?
Probably there was a couple, and they're the ones that fans talk about. The Auburn game, Tony Robinson. I forget the exact wordage now on the Sports Illustrated. Back then, if you made the cover of Sports Illustrated, you're in pretty tall cotton. Certainly that game, and then the Cotton Bowl. The Sugar Bowl game. It was an unbelievable atmosphere. Again, Tennessee had not been there for 14 years or so. It was a 90% Tennessee crowd in an indoor stadium. I remember we came out of the locker room. We had to walk underneath stands, and we had to walk all the way around. Our locker room we had to walk all the way around to make our entrance onto the field at the other end, and you could hear the Tennessee fans out there, stomping their feet. And I tell you, Tennessee hadn't had many performances better than that one. It was a butt kicking, and
against Miami, yeah.
And they were good, and we were good, and our defense was phenomenal under Ken Donahue. I know we're going to talk about him here and maybe in just a second. Ken brought that 1985 season, and again, these are just my opinions, but I'd been there 5 years at that point, 6 years. We were lacking something on defense. We were good on offense, but we were just pretty good on defense. Ken brought that factor. He had been he had played at Tennessee for Neyland. He had been with Coach Bryant, Stevens coordinator for 6 national championships. He brought some pizzazz, I guess would be the way to put it. And our defense was just phenomenal that year. We were very good on offense, very good, especially until Tony got hurt, Robinson. But we were outstanding on defense. I think our last 6 games, 4 of them were shutouts. One of them was a 7-point game. So, and of course, that ball game was a blowout. It really was.
Well, in 1983, a young man who plays a pretty big role in that 1985 team, young man from Elizabethton named Charles Davis, accepts a scholarship to come play for Tennessee. Goes on to obviously have a great career as a defensive back, now one of the foremost broadcasting voices in the NFL. Coach, I think when people listen to you and Charles Davis on Football Saturdays on The Zone, they almost assume that he played for you, that you coached him as a defensive back, as a defensive coordinator, but you were still the running backs coach when he played at Tennessee. So how did that relationship get to where it is now?
Well, I was in charge of the kicking game. Now back then, when I say the kicking game, the coverage part of it, we had a guy named George Caffago who handled the kickers, and I stayed as far away from him as I could because he was, I mean that great guy.
You're handling running backs and returners.
Well, and coverage.
Right.
All the coverage. The punt coverage team, punt return team, kickoff coverage team, kickoff return team. I handled that, but it wasn't a special, I was the running back coach first. Best thing that ever happened to me, because all through my career, even when I became coordinator, I still handled the coverage teams because I always looked at it like the kickoff and the punt coverage. Those really are the first play of defense. The further you can pin them back. So I used all defensive players almost exclusively, but that was where Charles came from. That, and you know what Charles is, people who listen to him, and you see him everywhere, he's one of the most respectful young men. I say young men, he's in his mid-50s now. But he's just respectful of everybody. He still calls me coach, and I hadn't coached in 30 years. But he really is. I'll tell you an interesting story about Charles Davis. I was sitting in my office one day, 81 or 82, I forget what year he came in. I got a phone call, and it's from the secretary put the phone call through, and it was from a coach up in New York. Well, we don't recruit New York. I don't know if Tennessee had ever had a player from New York, and maybe Neyland had a few back in the day, but we hadn't had any. Anyway, so I get on the phone. This guy, he tells me his name and everything. He says, I have a young man that I'd like for you to look for. He said, he's my son. It was Charles's dad. He said, he's a quarterback. And he said, I would like for you to take a look at him. And so we talked a little bit. And so I asked him, I said, Tennessee doesn't recruit up there. What's your interest in Tennessee? So, well, number one, Charles was born in Elizabethan. He said, but secondly, he said, my son's a quarterback. He's an African American, and I know Tennessee will play African American quarterbacks. Charles Davis probably would not have came to Tennessee if it hadn't been for that. Now, he came there as a quarterback. He happened to come in with Tony Robinson, saw quickly he wasn't going to play, and ended up redshirting his first year, started 4 years for us at safety. And, of course, his junior year was that 85 conference championship team. He and Chris White, two great safeties. I mean, great safeties. Not pro guys, but great safeties. They knew where to go, knew how to play. And, of course, Charles now, I would put Charles Davis and Peyton Manning, probably Tamika Catchings, as the three athletes who epitomize, in my mind, what the University of Tennessee athletic program and the University of Tennessee is all about. They're quality spokesmen for that university.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise you, right, seeing what he's done since then. I know he kind of got a little bit of a start in broadcasting, learning under John Ward when he was still in school.
He
right?
did, but he actually he started off coaching when Walt Harris. He was a grad assistant, and when Walt took the head job at the University of Pacific after the '88 season, he took him, Charles, with him, and then we had another guy on that staff who was a graduate assistant, who was Charles' roommate, named John Gruden. So Charles and John went to Pacific with Walt. They were roommates together. Rest is history.
That's right. And then John Gruden, he spent some time, of course, as a GA at Tennessee. His wife went to Tennessee. What a cool connection to go back to. Coach, let's fast forward a little bit to the 1988 season. It's about midway through that you're named the defensive coordinator, replacing Ken Donahue. You've mentioned did such an incredible job elevating that program as the defensive coordinator. But that season starts off really rough. What transpires for you to step into that role as defensive coordinator?
We were coming into that year. We were 2 years removed from the Sugar Bowl. We had a good team. We lost our first 5 ball games. And the fifth one, we lost to Washington State in Neyland Stadium. I think Mark Ripien was the quarterback, as I recall. We played him a couple times. He could have been the quarterback on one of the others. And they just, we were terrible on offense. We were bad on defense. Coach Major decided to make a change. We had an open week, and then Alabama was coming to town. So I got a phone call that night. Again, we didn't have cell phones back then. I got a phone call that night. We had an open date. So after the ball game, you certainly don't celebrate when you get your fanny whipped like that. And he said, Doug, I want you to be in my office at 7 o'clock, whatever time it was, tomorrow morning. I said, yes, sir. So I hung up the phone, and my wife said, is that Coach Majors? And I said, yeah. And I said, what do you want? And I said, he wants to see me tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock. And he said, my wife said, do you think he's going to fire you? And I said, I hope he does, because that's how bad we were. But anyway, he made the change. Ken Donahue was so highly respected, because I had been on the offensive side of the ball. We played Alabama when I was at Louisville. We played Alabama when I was at Virginia Tech, and we certainly played Alabama when I was at Tennessee. Ken Donahue was an iconic figure for assistant coaches back at that time. Great defensive coordinator. He was Coach Bryant's right-hand man. Coach Perkins came in. They let him go. And then he came to Tennessee. Listen, let me kind of go back to that 85 Sugar Bowl team. In my mind, in my opinion, there is no doubt we were probably, without Ken Donahue, we only played 11 regular season games back then. We were probably an 8-3, maybe a 7-4, maybe a 6-5 team without him. But he provided that spark. So when Coach told me he was going to replace Coach Donahue with me, I mean, it was sad, and it was because I just admired the guys so much. But obviously, that's one of those things where you have to do it. And to Ken, the thing I loved about Ken was he came walking in my office the next Monday, or the Monday, it wasn't the Sunday, but the Monday, and early. He got there early. And he said, Doug, he said, hey, just want you to know, I know that you probably don't feel good about this. And I said, well, Coach, I don't. He said, hey, that's part of this profession. And he handled it so gracefully, which I knew he would. But it was tough, no doubt about it. It was tough. We changed our whole staff. I came over and coached the secondary. That was what I knew. We moved Kevin Steele, who, of course, Kevin now, everybody knows who Kevin Steele is. He was a secondary coach, moved him up to linebackers. We had a guy named Dick Bumpus, who went on to TCU and was the defense coordinator there, moved him up to the defensive line. We went from a 3-man front to a 4-man front. We went from a man coverage defense predominantly, to a zone coverage. And then we played Alabama 11 days later. So it was I wouldn't want to go through it again, let me put it like that, because it was but that's the way a lot of professions are like this, but certainly football, because changes happen quickly.
So the first 6 games of that season, Tennessee starts 0-6. I've got some numbers here. Now, I'm not sure in particular which game was your first as the defensive play caller, but in those first 6 games, an 0-6 start, Tennessee allowed 35 points per game. The last 5 games of that season, Tennessee allowed 15 points per game, finishing 5-0. It's quite a turnaround.
Well, it is, but my first game there was Alabama. So they come in, they beat us 28-20 in Neyland, but we played well. And I think it gave certainly our players, our fans, and certainly me as a first-time play caller, it gave me some confidence. And to be honest, Lucas, the last 5 games that we won, they weren't Auburn and they weren't Alabama. They were teams. They were good teams, Southeastern Conference teams. But we ended up winning those last 5, went 5-6, and kind of gave everybody some, I think, renewed hope on that. Certainly on the staff. There's no doubt in my mind. Coach Fulmer and I have talked about this a lot. He was on the offense, of course, at that time. Wasn't the coordinator, but he was on the offense. If we would have continued the way it started, they weren't going to fire John Majors, but I think they would have fired all the rest of us. So, things like that. I had an opportunity. Coach gave me an opportunity, and then, of course, we went on the next year and had one of the best years in Tennessee history. As a matter of fact, were you going to talk about that?
1989, 11-1, basically an Alabama loss away from a national title, right? SEC champs.
Yep.
Yeah.
We had going into the '89 season. Again, we had changed our staff a little bit. A guy named Jim Bates came in. Jim was a former Tennessee player who was a great coach. I didn't even know who he was when we finally ended up hiring him. Interviewed him, and he played for Coach Dickey there. Didn't play a whole lot, but he played. But he brought in a great president. Jim went on to be Steve Spurrier's defense coordinator at Florida, defense coordinator for the Green Bay Packers, had a great career there. And then we brought in a young coach who was a Tennessee grad who was at Alabama A&M or Alabama State, one of the two, young guy named John Chavis. And, Johnny was kind of wet behind the ears, as they say. But he wanted to learn, and we know what happened with him there. But actually went out in '89. We opened up with Colorado State, barely beat him 16-14, I think. Went out to play UCLA out there, and it's always difficult. Tennessee is one of the few teams in the South, if you go back and look through history, that would play Southern Cal, would play Notre Dame, would play UCLA. Of course, UCLA, big football name back then. We go out to Los Angeles second game. It's difficult. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's difficult how how difficult it is to go from a Eastern time zone to a Pacific time zone and play a game. We see that with the Titans, and the pro teams on that, and those guys are pros, they're grown men. So we went out there, and they had a good football team, and we really played well. Beat them 24 to 6 or 7. They may have kicked an extra point there. Played really well on defense, and that kind of got us really knowing we could be because they were a good team, and that was a big win. Then we came back and we beat Georgia. We beat Auburn at home in the rain. Got ourselves in great position. Went down with 5-0. Went down and played Alabama. We had some off the field issues that affected our team, but Alabama beat us pretty good, and we weren't going to beat them anyway, probably. And then ended up having win the rest of our ball games. Won the Cotton Bowl, 11-1. It was Coach Major's best record at Tennessee. Not his best team,
sure,
but his best record at Tennessee. And then I decided I was probably going to do something else.
When you look back at your career at Tennessee, what do you appreciate the most about working for Johnny Majors, and what was the hardest thing about working under Johnny Majors?
Well, first off, I learned a lot of football under Coach Majors. He was a fundamental guy. He wasn't, I tell people this often about him, He was never a coordinator before he became a head coach. He was head coach, I think, at 28.
At Iowa State.
Yes, right. And he played in the CFL until he was about 23. So when he was an assistant, he was under the great Frank Broyles and that group of people. But he had, and of course, he played for Bowden Wyatt, who was a Neyland guy. So his dad, but fundamentally, he was the best head football coach fundamentally I was ever around. He didn't get involved in game planning a whole lot. He let his coordinators do that. He certainly would come in and say, hey, I think we need to look at this a little bit. But for the most part, in games, he let his play callers and coordinators play, and he handled the game. And he did a magnificent job of handling the game. I've said this often about him. I cannot recall in the 10 years I was with him, 110, 120 games. I cannot recall him, and I was always on the sideline pretty much right next to him. I cannot recall him making a bad coaching decision. And I'm talking about going for it on fourth down, going for two, quick kicking. He had that feel for that. And I think one of the reasons I think a lot of head coaches today could learn from that I think Coach Saban is like this, quite frankly. It's hard to call plays and be a head coach. If the head coach has got so much going on into a game and thinking ahead and thinking about strategy, that's what Coach was really, really good at on that. He could be difficult to work for, but there's been a lot of really good head football coaches that were difficult to work for. And you don't get many opportunities to coach at a place like Tennessee and learn. And it was I spent half my career there. So obviously I could have left at any time that I didn't want to, that I wanted to. But and the other part of it is, and I think you all, of course, Will, who's here also, you realize what football means in the state of Tennessee to the Tennessee fan base. Now here we are in 2022, and Tennessee's not had much success in the last decade, but I'm around a lot of people, as you all know. This is still a Tennessee state, and it's a Tennessee town, city. It's going to be, and they're all sitting there waiting for a John Majors or a Phillip Fulmer or a Bowden Wyatt or a Robert Neyland to come along. Hopefully we got that guy right now. And, I know the situation at Tennessee is so much better from a president of the system to the chancellor to the athletic director. You just got to get that right guy and get those right players, and Tennessee will be back. They've proven it too many times over the history of this great program.
So I hear you talking about Tennessee. It's obvious the connection you have to the program. You refer to it as we. You're still very involved, I know, with Josh Heupel's administration there. But your career, your coaching career, is bookended by stints at Vanderbilt. It's your alma mater. It's where you played your college football. How do you kind of separate those allegiances? Because both played such a huge role in your life.
I came to Vanderbilt as a junior college player. I was only Vanderbilt 2 years. I'd never been east of the Mississippi except one time. We played in a national junior college championship game in Savannah, and we actually flew. That's the first time I ever flew in a plane, and it's the first time I was east of the Mississippi. I didn't know where Vanderbilt was. I came to Vanderbilt because of Bill Pace. I had the opportunity to go other places. He was from my hometown, as we mentioned, and the other part of it was, and I hope this doesn't sound, I hope people take it the way I mean it. I was going to be a football coach. It didn't make any difference where I went to school. You know, I could have went to Cumberland or anywhere. I was going to be a football coach. Playing in the Southeastern Conference was a big deal, and I had an opportunity to do that. And I still have a allegiance to a lot of players that I played with, and a lot of people that I met at Vanderbilt. But my relationship is with the athletic department, not the university. I won't get into all the reasons why, but and I spent 10 years at Tennessee. And my two sons were raised there. I recruited the state of Tennessee, got to meet so many great Tennessee people. And then doing, of course, Big Orange Sunday for all these years now, I've kind of stayed close. And you're right, Coach Heupel has granted me. I've been very, very fortunate that almost every head coach up there has given me access. I think I try to do a good job of not saying things that I know is going to happen before they happen, because then I wouldn't have that access. I'm allowed to go to practice anytime I want. I've got to know Coach Heupel very well. He's an Oklahoma guy, and I'm an Oklahoma guy. He isn't from Oklahoma. He's from South Dakota. By the way, the University of Tennessee has had two head football coaches from South Dakota, Josh Heupel and Doug Dickey. A lot of people didn't know Doug Dickey was up there. Coach Heupel and I also have a few other. He played in South Dakota for his father. His first, he signed and went to play in Ogden, Utah for Weber State, where I coached. He then transferred to a junior college, so we kind of have that part of it too. And then several of the people, and people have heard, Coach Proctor, who I talk about, he was and still is close to people in Norman and Oklahoma that I'm very close to also. So, but he's given me a lot of access, and I appreciate that. That's why I really go out of my way. I don't talk about things on the air that on Big Orange Sunday or Saturday, for that matter, that would put any of that in jeopardy. I get, again, able to go to practice, so it's been good. I've got to know his staff pretty well, and so those are the reasons for that.
So you come back to Nashville after you leave Tennessee, spend 1 year as the defensive coordinator at Vanderbilt. I know you didn't intend to come back to be the defensive coordinator at Vanderbilt, but you get that opportunity. You do 1 year there. And then the reason you came back to Nashville is to start your business, right? Doug Mathews Team Sports. My question is, you started Doug Mathews Team Sports in 1991. It's now Mathews Team Sports, run by your son, Tate. You started broadcasting with Big Orange Sunday in 92 on WLAC, still on the air on 104.5 The Zone. Between those two things that I just said, what are you more proud of?
Well, I want to go back and just hit one thing. When I left Tennessee, a lot of people don't know this. When I left Tennessee, I did not leave Tennessee to come to Vanderbilt.
Right.
My wife and I knew we loved Middle Tennessee. We were married my last year as in Vanderbilt, and then I coached one year here. I'd recruited to this area. We knew we were going to move back here at some point. And quite frankly, I'd been coaching 19 years at that time. I was ready to try to do something else, quite honestly. So I came back over to Nashville I had a few months left on my contract in Knoxville. It was a great time to leave. We were 11-1, just won the Cotton Bowl. So I was going to find something to do over here, had an opportunity to do it, and had some options. And Watson called me. Watson was, and I played together at Vanderbilt. He was sophomore when I was senior. Said, Doug, I'm going to make a change in my defensive coordinator. Would you consider? He just hired Steve Sloan to be his offensive coordinator. And I said, well, Watson, let me think about it. So anyway, as things worked out, I went over for him for 1 year. And then I started team sports. I don't know if the word would be proud, but y'all can, and people listening to this can probably just imagine. It'd kind of be like if you're a business person and you decide that you're going to quit your business and go get into coaching. I just did it reversed. I knew nothing about the business world. I don't know that I'd ever written a check because my wife handled all that when I was coaching. I never deposited a check. I never wrote a check. I didn't know how much money we had. So I found this All-American athlete, was able to buy it, make arrangements to buy it. I didn't have any money. Most money I ever made coaching at that time was $59,000 a year. Well, it's actually a little bit more than that at Vanderbilt, but Tennessee was the most I ever made was $59,000 a year. I made $59,000 as defense coordinator. Coach Fulmer made $59,500 as offensive coordinator because he was also the assistant head coach. But
little bonus in there for the assistant
yeah,
head
that's
coach.
right, and he earned it. I'm glad. But I think running the business, I was able to do it 23 years. Built a good report, a team sports to Mathews Team Sports, and I have no ownership in that now. That's that Tate owns and runs that. But we're not open to the public. We call strictly on schools, some leagues, but primarily schools. And it was the relationships that I'd built up when I was recruiting this area for 10 years. So then I saw the opportunity to on the radio end. Cumulus, when Cumulus took over, it was they gave me a unique opportunity. We probably won't get into that, but a unique opportunity that very, very, very few people in America have an opportunity to do. Cumulus has given me the opportunity. I don't work for Cumulus. I don't work for 104.5. I buy the time and then resell it. It's on weekends, obviously. And they gave me the opportunity to do that. I think they would tell you, I certainly would tell you, it's been a outstanding relationship both ways. And being able to work it the way I've worked it with Cumulus, they have I have total the sponsorships on there and content. Now, obviously, you have to stay within guidelines and rules, but they've given me the opportunity to do that, and they pretty much let me do pretty much what I want. It's been great from that standpoint. We've built up an excellent listenership. The Saturday show, I stay away from Tennessee on that. I think anybody that listens to that knows that that's an all-inclusive. I try to talk about it. It's a football show. I'm a football coach. We don't take phone calls on either show. Tennessee is Big Orange Sunday is all Tennessee. I've been able to have Tony Barnhart on there and Charles Davis. They've been on with me since the inception. Tony and Charles, when I first started doing this show, nobody really knew who they were. They knew who Charles was. They had heard of Tony. And, boy, those two guys blossomed. I was so lucky to get both of them on the air. And, I tell Charles all the time, Charles, I know you're busy and blah, blah, blah. He said, Coach, as long as you want me on that show, I'm going to be on that show. Tony much the same way. And then being able to add a Bill Justice and Alan Cockrell. One of the things that, and you and I have talked about this, Lucas, I try to do on the show, I try to talk about what I know. Mm-hmm. I know football. I don't know any more about basketball or baseball or track or anything else than the average fan. So I try to get people on there who do know and then try to bring that out. We've had officials on there, but I really try to get information. This is a sport, kind of going back to the way we started this. From my earliest memory, I have loved football. And this is a sport that I like giving out information about. I like talking about what happened at Oklahoma in Tennessee and Alabama, and I'm a history guy anyway, and I love talking about the sport that I love so much.
Last thing, Coach, and I really appreciate you doing this. Learned a lot about that 80s period of Tennessee football, which is still so fascinating to me. When you think back to Johnny Majors and all those games that you worked under him at Tennessee, you mentioned earlier you never saw him make a bad football decision in game. Is there one story or instance that comes to mind, whether it's that comeback at Notre Dame or the Sugar Bowl against Miami in 85 or that 89 season when you go 11-1, the 82 upset over Alabama, anything? Can you think of a specific instance where the game turned around because of a decision that Johnny Majors made or a conversation that Johnny Majors had with the football team? Is there anything that comes to mind?
I wasn't there for the comeback in Notre Dame. That was year after I left.
Okay.
That was 90.
Gotcha.
I wasn't there for that. Not one particular thing during the game, but what he was good at. He was good at and he would say this all the time, and it wasn't just a saying. Fans who remember, he was always talking about the bullseye, keeping your eye on the bullseye, and which essentially was, hey, all the stuff on the periphery, leave it out there. Let's keep our eye on the bullseye. There wasn't any one particular play, I don't think. And again, his role was more getting the team and the coaching staff ready for the game. He and I had some disagreements about this afterwards, and matter of fact, he asked me one time, I'd made the comment to him, one of the things that I always talk about when I talk about him in speeches and things was the fact that he let his coaches coach, and he kind of took that during the game I'm talking about, and he kind of took that as he wasn't involved. Far from it. But he was involved in watching that game. He had a really excellent ability to see that, hey, he wouldn't come on and say, I want to throw a takeoff route or I want to run the ball. He would say, I think we can run the ball a little bit more. I think we can attack them in this area. And then he let his play callers do it. And he would do that. He was tremendous during the game. He realized that talking – if a play caller is calling plays, and I think really good coaches always do this, you got to let them call the game. And if you're second guessing them or if you're questioning, then they're up there. What's their confidence level going to be? Now, after a ball game, he would sit down and say, hey, tell me why we did this, or maybe a little bit stronger terms, but not any one particular play, but many times during ball games, we would, I don't know that it turned the game around. But it was it certainly let us do some things that he felt like we could do. He also was really good at this, very good at halftime. Very, very rarely did we come out in the second half and not have made adjustments in key ball games that helped us win or helped us stay in games.
Coach, thank you for being here.
Good to be here. Enjoyed it. It's a great idea. I'm anxious to see who else you get on these airways, but appreciate you having me be part of it.
Thanks so much for being here. A great conversation. Coach Doug Mathews on Inside Zone. Rate, review, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and stay tuned. More coming. I'm Lucas Panzica. This is Inside Zone on the 104.5 The Zone Podcast Network.